The narrative begins on the planet Yaya Prime, where a young runt predator named Dek takes part in intense training. Using various specialized tools, he crosses the hostile terrain until reaching the entrance of a cave where his scanner indicates that his brother is hiding nearby. Taking advantage of the element of surprise, Dek advances silently and attempts to attack him from behind with his blade. However, Queen reacts in time and blocks the strike with precision. The two brothers then engage in direct combat, exchanging rapid attacks while Queen constantly provokes Dek, encouraging him to use the cave environment strategically to his advantage. The blades collide repeatedly as they move through different parts of the location, until, after a sequence of intense confrontations, Queen manages to corner Dek, but chooses not to finish him. Faced with the refusal to surrender, Queen cuts the base of the pillar they are standing on, causing Dek to fall toward the deep abyss. Even so, Dek manages to survive by holding onto the rocky wall and with effort climbs back to continue the confrontation, demonstrating persistence and determination. Later, already aboard the ship, Queen informs that the time has come for Dek to choose a prey to prove his worth and earn his place in the Aya clan. Determined to stand out, Dek declares that he wishes to go to Jenna, known as the feared planet of death, with the objective of hunting the legendary invincible creature called Kalisk. Even their father fears this monster, and it is precisely this extreme challenge that motivates Dek, tired of being seen as weak and insignificant. Queen disagrees with this risky choice, but Dek maintains his decision firmly and performs his solemn oath. At that moment, their father, Nijar, returns and grants Dek his honor with a sample of blood. However, Nijar shows surprise at seeing Dek still alive, revealing that he had ordered Queen to eliminate him for considering him too weak to belong to the clan. Despite this, Queen defends his brother, stating that he deserves a chance to prove his true worth. Enraged, Nijar activates a device that captures Dek and orders Queen once again to execute him immediately. Instead, Queen betrays the order, frees Dek, and activates the transport system to send him to the ship. Then he activates his shield to protect him while Nijar fires at them. After ensuring that Dek cannot escape from the ship, Queen faces his father in direct combat and with agile movements manages to disarm him temporarily. Nijar then activates his advanced camouflage, but Queen continues attacking with precision until Nijar counterattacks brutally, piercing his hand and tearing off his arm. Queen falls severely injured and while trying to crawl, chooses to reach for his own arm instead of the weapon, evidencing his attachment and desperation. Nijar calls him weak and stabs him without hesitation. In his final moments of life, Queen uses his remaining strength to activate the ship, ensuring that his brother continues toward Jenna. Dek watches helplessly as his brother is mortally wounded, and the impact of the ship's launch leaves him unconscious. Sometime later, Dek awakens to the sound of an urgent alarm. The ship has been damaged after colliding with debris in orbit and is being violently pulled toward the planet Jenna. Without wasting time, Dek runs to the ejection seat and launches himself into space, beginning a vertiginous fall through the hostile atmosphere. During the descent, a bird nearly collides with him, forcing him to activate his shield to avoid the impact. He finally lands in the dense jungle of the planet and lets out a roar of frustration, but quickly regains composure. Determined to fulfill his objective, he carefully checks his weapons to ensure they are operational. A nearby noise catches his attention, and he begins to investigate the area cautiously. Suddenly, a creature resembling a living vine attacks him by surprise, stealing one of his weapons. Dek reacts by preparing his sword, but another vine wraps around his arm, forcing him to cut it while the first escapes. Soon, several others appear, wrapping around his leg and dragging him across the ground with force. He manages to reach his bow and fires at the creature, forcing it to release him, and strikes the vines to maintain distance. Then he runs to recover his sword and quickly cuts the tentacles that continue to attack him without ceasing, even destroying several of them. New ones keep emerging in greater numbers, even attacking him in a coordinated manner. Demonstrating agility, Dek dodges multiple strikes and jumps onto one of the vines, using it as support to reach the top of a high cliff. There, finally out of reach, he observes the surrounding environment and realizes how threatening and deadly that planet truly is. After that, he cleans his wounds in a nearby river and uses his scanner to locate a medicinal plant that can also be used as an improvised explosive. Upon examining a leaf, he finds a worm that produces small red spheres, and upon discarding it, notices that it explodes, confirming its potential. Then he continues his journey in search of Kalisk. In an open area, he encounters strange red plants that emit threatening hissing sounds, forcing him to advance with extreme caution to avoid them. At that moment, he hears a voice speaking in an unknown language, and upon looking up, sees a figure named Thea trapped in a large suspended nest. Realizing that he cannot understand him, Thea activates a universal translator, revealing herself to be an android classified as synthetic. Suddenly, a native vulture of Jenna appears nearby and picks up a stone to throw it at the plants. The impact causes the pods to release a red smoke and fire sharp needles in all directions, which Dek narrowly avoids. Thea then explains that these needles have paralyzing properties, allowing the vulture to capture and devour its prey easily. When Thea offers assistance, Dek firmly states that the Urea conduct their hunts alone, and she immediately deduces that his presence on that planet is aimed at finding the feared Kalisk. While they talk, the vulture returns and begins throwing more stones, activating several plants around them, and in this chaos, Dek ends up being hit by the poisonous needles. As the effect begins to take hold, leaving him dizzy and with compromised senses, Thea requests a weapon, and he, even weakened, throws one of his blades before completely losing consciousness. The vulture then dives from the skies, ready to devour him, but Thea reacts quickly, attacking the creature with precision and eliminating it brutally using the blade she received. In the final moments before passing out, Dek is still able to see her wave. Shortly afterward, he awakens realizing that Thea applied an antidote extracted from the same poisonous plant. Recovering, Dek stands up and helps Thea do the same, only to notice that half of her body is missing. She calmly explains that she is a synthetic sent by the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, since ordinary humans cannot survive in that hostile environment, but Dek shows indifference and simply lets her go. Thea then emphasizes that many Yoyoya have already tried to hunt the Kalisk and none have survived, while she herself remained alive, suggesting that she can guide him to the creature's lair if he takes her along, ensuring that he obtains his trophy while she recovers her lost parts. Dek understands that it was the Kalisk itself that destroyed her, but initially shows no interest. However, upon hearing her define herself as a useful tool, he stops seeing it as a violation of his principles and agrees to take her with him. During the journey, Thea maintains a constant flow of questions and observations, contrasting with Dek's silence. While crossing a river, worm-like creatures begin to spit acid at them, forcing Dek to carry Thea on his back to advance faster. However, the path becomes blocked, and Thea takes the opportunity to guide him, throwing a sticky fruit onto the ground, attracting the worms that begin feeding and cease their attacks. As soon as they leave the river, Dek cuts several vines and ties Thea to his back to facilitate movement. During the night, they stop to rest, and Dek uses a device as a light source. At that moment, Thea reveals that her team arrived on the planet about 2 years ago, and that she was trapped in the vulture's nest for almost 2 weeks, waiting for rescue from another synthetic named Tessa, mentioning that both possess a higher sensitivity than other models. Dek interprets this trait as weakness, while Thea considers it an essential advantage to understand other life forms. She recalls that she remained confined in a laboratory until Tessa took her to explore the environment, but on that same day they were attacked by the Kalisk. In parallel, at the crew's base, it is revealed that Tessa has an appearance identical to Thea's and suffered severe damage during the attack, now being in a repair capsule. Even in critical condition, Tessa continues repeating Thea's name and reliving the event, until the ship's system reminds her that her primary mission is to capture the Kalisk. The system also detects the presence of a Yayoya, classifying it as a potential threat. When Tessa finally awakens, she is informed that Thea was captured by this individual. The next morning, Dek sets out to hunt for food and finds a bone bison, known to be one of the Kalisk's favorite prey. Upon attempting to approach, he realizes that the field is covered with extremely sharp vegetation, forcing him to retreat temporarily. As he prepares to throw his blade, a small creature appears jumping from a tree and lands beside them. Thea cannot identify it, and Deck growls at it, immediately receiving another roar in response. The creature then chases the bison with great ease, as its resistant skin is not affected by the cutting grass. Irritated by the unexpected competition, Deck begins jumping between the trees to follow the prey, but his weight breaks a branch, causing both to fall. Quickly, he embeds his blade into the tree, stopping the fall just before hitting the dangerous vegetation. When the bison passes nearby, Deck jumps onto it and attacks, but the animal reacts violently, throwing them against another tree. The small creature rolls ahead of them, and a frustrated Deck knocks it down, initiating a direct fight that often ends up crushing Thea in the process. Despite its small size, the opponent shows surprising strength, but after an intense struggle, Deck manages to dominate it by the neck. At that exact moment, the bison returns at high speed toward them, and Deck reacts by throwing his sword precisely, keeping the creature's mouth open while the blade pierces through its body, splitting it completely in half with brutal efficiency. Deck lets out a triumphant roar to celebrate the successful hunt. However, suddenly, a tentacle emerges and wraps around his leg, lifting him violently into the air. The duo ends up being captured by a creature known as the Luna insect, whose tentacular tongue, firm and oppressive, completely prevents Deck from using any of his technological devices. At the moment they seem about to be devoured without any chance of reaction, the small creature jumps precisely into the insect's mouth and, using its extremely resistant skin, blocks the creature's teeth, breaking them with force. The intense pain causes the Luna insect to retreat and spit them out, moving away slowly across the cutting grass. Driven by a fierce desire for revenge, Deck knocks down a nearby tree and positions it as an improvised bridge. The small creature already crosses the field rolling, but ends up being captured again by the insect's tongue. At this decisive moment, Deck jumps onto the monster's head and delivers a deep strike with his sword, opening a massive cut that finally eliminates it definitively. Meanwhile, Tessa and her team of synthetics continue tracking Thea, finding Deck's pod before being surprised by aggressive vines. The team reacts quickly, firing to contain the advance of the plants and then using flamethrowers to burn them completely until they no longer pose any threat. During the night, Deck and Thea set up camp again. The small creature continues to follow them, imitating each of Deck's movements, clearly impressed by his skill during the previous hunt. Thea decides to call it Buddy, while Deck shares the roasted meat with the improvised group. In a quieter moment, Thea questions Deck about his family, leading him to recount the events involving his brother and his father, although he rejects any idea of being emotionally affected when that possibility is mentioned. He states that Tessa is equivalent to a sister, a concept that Thea begins to consider with interest and curiosity. During the early morning, Tessa and her team find Deck's ship, fallen after his ejection, and analyze several Yoja weapons scattered around, including a grenade that instantly freezes her hand when accidentally activated. The next morning, Deck leaves carrying Thea and leaving Buddy behind, insisting that his species hunts alone, while Thea remains silent about this for considering herself merely a functional tool. During the journey, she mentions wolves and explains that they hunt in groups, emphasizing that the true alpha is not the one who kills the most, but the one who protects the others. Deck does not understand the deeper meaning of this statement and insists that he will be the one who kills the most prey. Upon finding traces of a Kalask prey near a river, they follow this trail until reaching Thea's old base, now completely destroyed by the creature. Among numerous synthetic bodies, Thea locates her legs. Fortunately, a repair machine is still operational, allowing her to begin the process of reconnecting her body, although it takes time. She thanks Deck for the help, but also asks him to leave, revealing that she activated a beacon to call her team. She explains that her companions also hunt the Kalask and will not allow it to be killed by Deck. Even so, he refuses to flee, stating that he prefers to fall with honor rather than live as a coward. Observing oil spread among the debris, Deck ignites it, creating a dense smoke screen. The Kalask appears quickly, attacking him with enough force to damage his sword. Using a piece of metal as an improvised shield, Dek slides under the creature's body and cuts its belly, then throws a smaller blade into its head and cuts its tail. However, the wounds regenerate quickly, revealing why it is considered invincible. The monster captures Dek and throws him against the repair machine, knocking down Thea's legs. When trying to capture him again, Dek cuts its tongue to escape. The battle continues intensely, with successive attacks being dodged while Thea tries to recover her legs. Upon spotting a weapon on the ground, she fires at the Kalask to distract it. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Dek throws a chain into the creature's mouth and activates a mechanism that begins pulling it backward. Then he takes Thea's weapon and fires repeatedly. When the monster tries to attack him with its tail, Dek dodges and closes the door of a storage unit, partially trapping it. Using the Kalask's own body as support, he runs and jumps above its head, managing to decapitate it. Even so, the creature regenerates its head quickly and immobilizes him with its paw, analyzing him by smell, which momentarily prevents it from attacking. At this critical moment, Tessa intervenes by throwing a grenade that freezes both Dek and the Kalask, allowing its capture. Some time later, Dek awakens tied to a table inside the team's vehicle. Thea remains in standby mode, connected to the repair machine, while Tessa has already analyzed all his records. She shows contempt at seeing Dek alive, mentioning that his species eliminates the weak, and that serving her organization should be considered an honor. Then she awakens Thea and praises her for capturing 2 valuable specimens. Tessa injects a painful substance into Dek to begin experiments, while Thea tries to protect him discreetly, suggesting that he is not suitable for research for being considered inferior. Even so, Tessa insists on obtaining a sample and connects cables to his head, causing intense pain. Desperate, Thea turns off the equipment and states that they should be more than mere obedient machines, expressing the desire to be sisters. However, Tessa reveals that she never returned to save her, but only for the Kalask, calling her defective and agreeing with the tradition of eliminating the weak. At that moment, Tessa receives a communication from Earth and withdraws after ordering a guard to prepare Thea for transport. As the guard does not understand the Yaya language, Dek asks Thea to convince him to open one of his devices. She claims it is a map, and upon activating it, the device explodes, instantly killing the guard. With that, Thea frees Dek, but an alarm is triggered and other guards arrive shooting. Thea opens the rear door of the vehicle, allowing Dek to jump into a waterfall to escape. Sometime later, he returns to the wreckage of his ship and treats his wounds. Realizing that no usable weapons remain, he considers leaving the planet, but upon looking at his brother's helmet, he remembers that the true leader protects his own and does not abandon his fight. Dek returns to the dense jungle with renewed determination and begins collecting various dangerous natural elements to turn them into improvised weapons, gathering sharp blades of cutting grass, as well as poisonous spikes from the red flowers. He also manages to capture an acid worm using a fruit as bait, carefully storing it for strategic use. While carrying out this meticulous preparation, he reunites with Buddy and notices the peculiar odor coming from its saliva. After analyzing carefully, he finally understands that Buddy is in fact the offspring of the feared Kalask, and that previously he was spared by the larger creature precisely for carrying a similar scent. Faced with this, Dek covers the small one with his own saliva, trying to deliberately replicate this protective effect. Then he releases Thea's legs, allowing them to follow the signal of her upper part and lead him directly to where she is. Already at the new enemy base, Dek appears using bison bones as a kind of rudimentary armor, advancing aggressively and throwing acid at one of the guards, incapacitating him quickly. The legs continue advancing, guided by Thea's signal, who remains in a suspended state inside a sealed container. When 2 guards try to intercept them, Dek intervenes with impressive speed, eliminating them with an improvised whip. Buddy also participates in the combat, showing surprising strength by destroying one of the guards in a matter of seconds. Together, they continue advancing silently through the facility, neutralizing any threat along the way to ensure the legs proceed without interruption. Meanwhile, Tessa communicates with the corporation and informs that they will soon return with the captured Kalisk. When questioned about Dek, she coldly states that he is already dead. Inside the base, Dek continues using his collection of natural weapons to eliminate several synthetic guards, facing multiple enemies simultaneously in intense confrontations. In a laboratory, when cornered, he intentionally breaks a glass cage, releasing a vine sample that attacks and kills the guard. At the same moment, the legs reach Thea's container, jumping onto a guard and eliminating him with precision before opening the capsule. Thea awakens and shows relief, but upon hearing the approach of reinforcements, pretends to remain inactive. The legs attack again, knocking down another enemy, while Thea jumps out and engages in direct combat. The two parts of her body work in perfect synchrony, assisting each other during the fight. When one of the guards tries to hit the legs, they quickly dodge, causing the strike to destroy another synthetic that was being restrained by Thea. Then she lifts an improvised metal piece, while the legs push the last enemy's head against the object, eliminating him. Shortly after, Dek arrives at the location, only to realize that the container is already empty. A guard tries to attack him from behind, but is taken down by a precise shot from Thea. Her halves finally reunite, and she shows surprise at seeing Dek alive, who admits that he returned for her, acting like a proud and loyal wolf. Although Thea wishes to leave the place immediately, Dek declares that they must free the Calyx so that Buddy can reunite with his mother. At that moment, an alarm echoes throughout the base, and Tessa orders her team to accelerate the launch of the ship containing the creature. While investigating the situation, a group of soldiers finds Dek, who activates the combustible worms, causing a massive explosion that destroys all synthetics around at once. Shortly after, Tessa appears wearing a powerful combat suit and fires at Dek using a laser stolen from his own ship, destroying his acid worm. She begins attacking using the suit, knocking down structures and wielding a huge saw, while Dek skillfully dodges each strike. Inside the main ship, Thea tries to access the Calica containment, but discovers that the cage is locked. When a guard appears, her attempt to deceive him fails, leading her to smash his head against the metal structure. Then she uses the guard's own eyes to unlock the security mechanism. During the external confrontation, a violent blow throws Dek into the laboratory, where the arm of Tessa's suit is captured by a moving vine. He tries to climb, but Tessa throws him again, forcing him to hide behind a container. While searching for him, she does not notice that Dek climbed above the structure, positioning himself strategically above her. He then jumps to attack her, but Tessa quickly closes the cockpit, blocking the strike. Suddenly, the Kalisk appears and jumps onto the suit. Unfortunately, it is pierced by the saw activated by Tessa, who lifts it into the air. Taking advantage of the distraction, Dek climbs the back of the suit and begins tearing cables, reducing its efficiency. Tessa tries to react by throwing a grenade at the Kalisk, but Dek hits her with a metal bar, causing the grenade to freeze the suit's arm and force it to release the creature. Free, the Kalisk removes the saw from its own body and counterattacks furiously, destroying the suit in half. When the upper part falls, the monster devours Tessa and lets out a roar of victory. After the confrontation, Dek, Thea, and Buddy watch the Kalisk approach its offspring, sharing a silent and symbolic moment. Inspired, Dek shows respect by touching his forehead to the creatures. However, the moment is interrupted when the Kalisk suddenly explodes due to an ice grenade activated by Tessa, who was still alive inside its stomach. She emerges from the wreckage and tries to attack Thea, but Dek stabs her from behind, definitively ending her threat. He retrieves his device, while Buddy tears off her head as a final gesture. Sometime later, Dek returns to Yogg and presents Tessa's head as proof of his achievement. Even so, Nar continues to consider him a dishonor and orders 2 guards to eliminate him, but Dek reacts quickly and defeats them before they can act. Then he faces Nar, who uses his camouflage to hide. Dek activates the engine of a nearby ship, creating a sandstorm that reveals the enemy's position, allowing him to cut off his father's arm and neutralize him. Using a containment device, he imprisons him. Upon symbolically piercing Nar's helmet, he removes it and declares that Dek may return to the clan if he submits. However, Dek states that he already has his own clan, exactly at the moment when an already grown buddy appears and devours Nar's head. Thea congratulates him on the victory, while Dek takes his father's mantle as a symbol of his new position. At that moment, a new ship appears on the horizon, and Dek states with conviction that it is his mother returning.